today, our focus is on the literature review. We will also look at what is suggested in terms of using literature in planning different types of studies. Third, we will look at the steps in conducting a literature review. We will look at priority for selecting literature material. And the last aspect that we will look at is literature map. That is, if we would have enough time. Should we not have enough time, I would make sure that in the next workshop, we also include literature map, because this is one of the interesting subjects. And I'd like us to have a discussion and an engagement on that, because it is going to test our understanding of the workshop today. And the outcomes should be that participants should master the process of literature review. They should be able to apply acquired literature review skills in all stages of the research project. They should be agile in identifying literature relevant to their studies. Lastly, they should also be able to review synthesized literature for the relevant research design that they would have chosen. Colleagues, and when you want to undertake research, you will first be required to identify a topic that you are going to pursue so that you can start investigating. Your research project is actually based on the research topic. And that is the first thing that one does, even before you could start reading. I do know that other people do read in order to search for research topics. But that is not my entry point. My entry point is you can identify a research topic. Then after that, the research topic then suggests the type of literature that you must look at. That is why here it is said that once the researcher identifies a topic that can and should be studied, the search can begin for the related literature on the topic. The literature review accomplishes several purposes, and these are the ones that are following. First, it shares with the reader the results of other studies that are closely related to the one being undertaken. I've said earlier on that any author does not write for himself. He writes for stakeholders. Stakeholders can be researchers like ourselves. Stakeholders can be people, anybody else, the community. It can be an organization. Stakeholders can be policy makers. So when you are doing literature review, the outcomes will be documented, and that is what stakeholders will read. Literature review relates a study to the larger ongoing dialogue in the literature, filling in gaps and extending prior studies. Remember, the topic is sometimes about is a broad topic, and it falls within a specific area. And that topic, of course, a lot might have been written about it, a lot of discussion and a lot of knowledge. And that is what is going to be presented. And that is what comes to the fore when we undertake literature. We broadly and globally read what is there. Then we want to understand what the gaps are in the literature. Because when we do literature review, we want to know what has been studied and to which extent the topic has been studied. If the topic has not been studied, then it has not been studied. Then it is a good motivation for us to actually investigate. But also, if in that area of our proposed topic, studies have been undertaken. It might be that only a certain side or a certain dimension, part of what is contained in the area of research has been studied. So other dimensions have not been studied. So it means the gaps are those dimensions that are not studied. And our reason for studying is to close those gaps. In other words, to study the other dimensions so that we can finish the entire value chain. But other aspect that literature review does, it reveals recommendations that have come out from earlier studies. From some of the studies, earlier studies, you find that previous authors have made specific recommendations for future studies. For an example, as I've said, if they've studied a specific dimension of the study area and they have left gaps, they might make specific recommendations that in future the remaining gaps be studied. And when we do that, this is what is said here, that we would be extending prior studies. Then in other words, we depart where the previous authors have ended and we continue to study what they've recommended. So that is what literature review does for us. Literature review provides a framework for establishing the importance of the study, as well as the benchmark for comparing the results with other findings. We will be comparing, the other author has said that in South Africa, there is no genocide. Or the other one has said, no, the other author said, there's a little bit of genocide. Or the other would say, no, nothing is there about genocide. So we can compare the output of all the three studies. And this comes out when we're studying. And if we want to study genocide in South Africa, so we've got a good basis, we know what has been done. So we can be able to position our studies based on earlier investigations. All or some of these reasons may be the foundation for writing the scholarly literature into a study. We have mentioned three reasons. And I've, even when I concluded, to indicate that they would assist us in knowing what we want to study. And that is what we write, which is what they refer to as a foundation for writing scholarly literature. We write in order to extend, or we write in order to close a gap, or to finish what was started by other people. Or we can study something that has not been studied. Now, studies need to add to the body of literature on a topic, and literature sections in proposals are generally shaped from the larger problem to the narrower issue that leads directly into the methods of the study. Later on, I will show you a slide that I've prepared. It looks like a literature map, but it shows you when I was conducting another research project that I did consult literature on international scale from the at the global level. I also consulted literature continentally, such as in Africa, and then I went regionally, such as in the SADC, and then countrywide, and in South Africa, provincial-wide, such as in the Limpopo, or such as Gauteng, and the study side perspective, such as the specific area where the study was conducted. So this is what you will do when you're studying your literature. You will look at the entire level perspective, from the global to the specific, or from the global to the local. The local is where the study is being undertaken. Here I've written study side perspective. Now let's just look at how literature is used. Beyond the question of why literature is used, is the additional issue of how it is used in research and proposals. It can assume various forms. Colleagues, the best advice is to seek the opinion of your advisor or faculty members as to how they would like to see the literature addressed. In UNISA does have guidelines, and I do believe that these guidelines depend on the college under which you fall, or a specific department, and even the supervisor or your own department can have customized guidelines. It might be that UNISA does have a policy on preparing.
Just a quick one on the previous slide that we're on. Can
Yes.
you please go back a little bit? Sorry to interject on that point.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to get the point on the topic side because we're talking about the problem from the larger problem to the narrow issue. So because I'm not sure, my topic is based more locally,
Yes.
and then now it's talking about globally, and then we
Mhm.
can just try to make sure that it's come to the narrow issue. So I'm not sure if I'll be in line on the literature review.
You are. You know what happens?
Mhm.
You are studying a topic which is local.
Okay.
Now let me make an example of me, or the study that I conducted on the role of Venda culture in nature conservation. The study was located in the Limpopo and specifically under the tribal authority, Chivasa Tribal Authority. So it was highly localized, only in that area. But I was studying the role of culture and in conservation. So it means I wanted to understand how a culture, a specific culture, can contribute to the conservation of the environment. But then my keywords when I do literature search would include culture. Even if I put Venda culture, you might find that Tsonga culture comes in, or English culture comes in, or Asian culture comes in. Which means, in other words, it's already telling me that I must also look at the cultural perspectives of other cultures other than the Bavenda. And this will support me to have more understanding, to see that, oh, culture, when it contributes, it is like this, and it is because of this. Because every culture does have relationships with the environment. They might have different types of animals, different types of trees. They might have huge rivers or high mountains like the Himalaya, like the Alps, which are some of the largest mountains on earth. But a mountain is a natural resource, and it's part of it. Has got stones, it's got trees, it has got soil, and so on and so on. So these things we are required to study so that we can provide background and perspectives. Then you can understand if there is another way in which the Asian culture contributes to the conservation of natural resources. You will find it. If it is related to us, to how the Venda culture does it, you will find it when you read books that have written about the Venda, or you will find it when you start collecting data from the Venda. Oh, this thing is not only local. The issue of culture is an international aspect. And the issue of the relationship between culture and the environment is also international. But there is something specific about the Bavenda, which the Asians don't have, and which the Americans do not have. That is, there is something that we refer to as taboo. In Chivenda, there are some animals, animals like owls. When they sound, they come and pitch up on top of the roof and they sound. We think that, oh, this is an indication of something bad that is coming there. There is a Chivenda terminology which is referred to as utura, meaning that if this animal behaves in that specific area, then it's an omen, it's a sign of something bad or something good that will come. You see now, that might be unique to the Bavenda. But if you go to other cultures in South Africa or Southern Africa, you might find that there is a similarity, because our cultures are also related. You would remember that the Bavenda have got other cultural relations with people that are in Zimbabwe. You go to Zimbabwe, you find the Bavenda speaking people. So it means we might have originated from the same area, and therefore our cultures are related. So when we study, we can also say, oh, not only in Ntando, not only at Chivasa, even in Zimbabwe, it is like this. Oh, even in Asia, it is like this, but the difference is like that and that and that. So we are required to explore this so that our minds are broadened and we can put our studies in context, and we will be able to argue that no, cultures differ in their contribution in terms of conservation. Oh, cultures have got these similarities, and you pick it back on that because that enhances our understanding of the topic under investigation. Does it make sense? Do I contribute to an understanding? I was okay. Maybe I was on statement number 3. The best advice is to. I was saying different departments at the university do have their own guidelines. And they please do consult with these people. Then we need to know how this literature is used. As an advice, the literature review in a proposal or project should be brief and provide a summary of the major studies on the research problem. You know, my understanding is that literature's review is mainly detailed in chapter 2, from chapter 2 to chapter 3. If you've got chapter 4 with literature, I don't know, but I've seen literature detailed in chapter 2 and chapter 3. But I want to make a statement here that literature review is a continuous process, and it does not. It starts immediately you identify a topic. This is what I've said when I started here. Immediately you start identifying a topic, literature says starts. Then it is continuous. It means there is no section of the research project that will not use literature, and therefore literature review is a very strong support. So you read it every time, although some people would say, no, you don't have it in the proposal, but some institutions and some departments would say, no, we have it as part of the proposal. But others would say, have it brief as part of the proposal, say literature review, summary or initial literature review, knowing that you will go and unpack it and have too much of it in chapters 2 and 3. But knowing that even in the introduction and background study, you put the research into context because you write those sections, and you cannot write those sections if literature, you don't consult literature, because then we want to understand what you want to research. How do you understand what you want to research? You read about the topic, and that is literature review. But we are advised to always consult. But the literature review in a proposal or a project should be brief. It should be a brief summary of the major studies on the research problem. Yes, because you don't have enough space. They will even sometimes have dictated to you that your research proposal is not more than 20 pages or not more than 30 pages. So it means you don't have space to put all the literature that you would have studied. So you need to put a summary of what you have there, strategic statements, giving insight on what has been researched and what has been done on the topic. It does not need to be fully developed and comprehensive at this point, since faculty may ask for major changes in the study at the proposal meeting. No, this is just how they are advising. Now, some do propose that in this model, the literature review is shorter, say 20 to 30 pages in length, and tells the reader that the student is aware of the literature on the topic and the latest writings. Because we would have read a lot of people that have written, whether recent or old literature, to show that we actually have consulted broadly. Another approach is to develop a detailed outline of the topics and potential references that will later be developed into an entire chapter, usually the second chapter, entitled Literature Review. I've said something about chapter 2, but you can also have something on chapter 3. That is when you have got a lot of information to do for literature review. And that chapter 2 might run from 20 to 60 pages or so on. Then it depends on how much is written and then and the capacity and the understanding and the advice from the supervisors.
I'm quite new at this, and I hope I'm understanding. So in chapter 2, I have, I found a whole lot of literature that I think would work. But just say, so at which point do I decide, okay, I've now found all the literature? Or, my concern is I would like to send in my research proposal, but I'm still looking at trying to find literature. So can I add stuff afterwards?
Yes, you can add stuff afterwards. We will, after this workshop, I think next week, Tuesday, we will have another workshop related to this. And I've seen in that one, it addresses how much literature. So that one I cannot answer today. I didn't even consult that slide, but I did see it while I was browsing through. But if you have gaps that are left, I think the supervisor would have to advise. But if you have done globally, you have looked at the what has been said globally, internationally about this topic, and if you have looked at the continent in Africa, what they said, and if you go to SADC and you try and exhaust what SADC has said, and if you go to South Africa as a country, and you go to a province, you see you would have gone to 5 areas before you go to a specific site. Then you look for literature that speaks specifically to the site where the study is going to be conducted. I think there you should have a handful. And anybody who identifies a gaps, they will advise on the international aspect to also consider this one. Because when you do literature search, I think you can even find if you go to the search engines such as Science Direct and which is that one, Google Scholar and so on, you enter the research topic, then you will find a whole lot of articles, and you should have a strategy to quickly sift the irrelevant and articles that are not relevant to you. But the better way of looking at relevant articles is to look at the summary, which is an executive summary of, mainly if it is your articles, you go to the executive summary, then you would see this article is relevant, or it is related. Even the topic itself, it can tell you that no, I'm talking about the role of vendor culture, but this one is just saying culture. Sorry, I'm talking about the vendor culture and the environment. But any article that says culture and does not have the word environment, or the word animals, or the word plants, or the word soil, or the word water, or environment, so I don't take, because they will not support me. But anything that has got culture and talk about the natural environment, whether in totality or in bits and pieces, then I will be interested. Then I zoom and see how it is worded. And you would be able to see that although this topic does have water and culture, but the wording shows that no, this is not relevant to what I'm researching. So I think in that way you can decide preliminary how much you can include there. And of course, when it goes to the study leader, they will also be able to advise accordingly.
All right, thank you. But while you're doing that, maybe you see, okay, this worked, this culture, maybe, I don't know, in America, it showed me something about the environment. So yes, I could use those ideas and apply them to where I want to study.
Yes, and they are a good example of, you would argue that the contribution of culture into environmental conservation or management is not only prone to Africa. It's not only unique in Venda, there is an international perspective. You see, this is the reason why we read internationally. And internationally, let's just look. Now, it's not only it's globally, but is it only, are we hearing this from the American perspective, or the Europeans do have it, the Asians do have it? Then we can argue like that. Then it comes to our continent, it comes to our region, it comes to our country, it comes to our province, then specific locality. Then we can make those references. And when we do analyze our results, you will see that all this becomes very useful, because the findings might be very different with what is there in South Africa or in your research site, but similar to what is somewhere, what is found globally or continentally or regionally.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Now I've got examples that I'm going to share with you. And this is from one of the studies that I've conducted. The title was The Role of Venda Culture in Nature Conservation. You see, I make reference to it because I'm familiar with it. And when you ask me questions, I'll be very specific. Here we want to see how the author have prepared chapter 1. Remember, the proposal eventually becomes chapter 1. And we want to see how much literature has been used and how it has been used. So these are the sections where literature has been used. We've got an introduction. You agree that introduction to the study or background to the study uses literature, because there we need to give background. And what do? We read books so that we can contextualize the background. And when we come to the statement of problem, it's also the same. I've made a mistake here. Can I? Yeah, there we are. So the statement of problem can also make reference to literature, because if you have identified problem, you can even indicate literature that also support the problem, or that indicates that there is a problem. You do so. But also when you do maybe delimitation of the study might not have literature, because here that is where you set the boundaries, things that you will not study and things that you will study. Then you indicate here. Those don't depend on literature. But the definition of concepts, culture is a concept. How do we define it? How has culture been defined internationally or locally or in South Africa? And therefore, we can make reference that, okay, this definition also applies to the Venda culture, because Venda is also a culture. There's a cultural group there. Assumptions of the study, no, this does not need any literature. But the significance of the study, yeah, it also does not need that. But you can also see, you might have also seen that it is from 1 is to 1.1, 1.2, and 1.4. That is where we had literature use. But in this chapter, literature was not fully developed. So this is the reason why it was very, the chapter is also short. You can see that the literature, the pages on literature that contained literature were only 8, because the chapter only captured major headings, except definition of concepts, which is very, very short. But the assumptions and significance of the study, I have also indicated to you that they did not need references. And now we had that chapter 2 is where you do a lot of literaturing. You explore in details and in full. That is where we've had your the pages might vary, but between 20 to 60. It depends on the type of study and the advices that you would get from the study leaders. But in chapter 2, in this case, we had the length was 9 pages. No, 9. No, so it's from page 9 to page 18. So yes, indeed, it was also 9. But although fully developed, it appears short. So the approach, the research approach that was used here was mixed research approach. So here we've included a lot of headings and even subheadings. This is the reason why you see, for an example, under 2.3, you've got 231 to 234, because here we were trying to unpack those elements of the environment, and therefore we discussed conservation within the context, the Venda context. Oh, I also want to show you something here, that in this study, I started from the global to the continental and then to the specific. I think even the country perspective as well as the provincial perspective. This is the reason why 2.1 is entitled Western Concept of Conservation in Africa. And with this one, I described how we in South Africa have got protected areas. We've got the legislation that was based on the Western, which is conventional type of approach to nature conservation and environmental management. But at 2.2, then I indicated that even in Africa, we've got approaches that are African in nature. Until I went down to South Africa and then to the Limpopo province, and eventually I came to conservation within the context of Venda. Then I had to write now 231 to 234. So this is how chapter 2 was structured. Now, I just want to show you that the literature, the use of literature does differ between studies and studies. Now, I'm introducing you to a different study. This is the study on the establishment of catchment management agencies in South Africa. And I just have taken its chapter 1. And you can see that it is also not fully developed, and note very short literature sections. They are here. They are the introduction, the problem statement, specific research questions, no. Leading theoretical statement, yes, does have literature. Research methodology, yes, does have literature, because research approach, research methodology, the research design has to be read from books that have written about research processes. And the research design is also part and parcel of the literature review. Then 1.61 is also entitled literature review. So in this case, chapter 1 did have literature review, and it was not contained in the previous study. There was nothing in chapter 1 which says literature review. The heading literature review was only used in chapter 2. But the data collection techniques here is also part and parcel of the research, the literature review. Now, research methodology and research design sections are also based on literature. This is what I was just explaining. But all in all chapter 1s will not have a lot of literature review, because we always have dedicated sections or chapters that have got literature review. For an example, the chapter 2 of the CMA establishment project did have dedicated chapter also on literature review. This is fully developed and it's very long. It's the longest chapter that I've written in terms of literature review. It's 22 pages, which is 15 pages to 37. Earlier on, I just only indicated that my literature review was 9 pages. It started from page 9 to page 18. This is longer than the first example. This is chapter 2. But this project on the establishment of catchment management agencies also had chapter 3 that focused on literature review. And you could see its chapter 3 is saying organizing and organizational design in public institutions, a theoretical perspective. And this is a fully a chapter where literature has been fully developed, and the length is even longer than the previous chapter. This is 24 pages because it started from 38 to page 62. Just for a mini, this is just for the project on the establishment of catchment management agencies was a mini thesis for the master's degree. But the other one, where the literature was very short, was a full dissertation. In order to fulfill the requirement of that master project, it was a master's project, I did not have to do coursework. But for this one, for the catchment management agencies, I did coursework. But still, it produced the larger report than the one where it was a full dissertation. Now, this chapter 3 is there precisely because I have identified a theory and I had to explain a theory. So the contents of this section on the theoretical framework was more, so I had more literature that assisted me to unpack and present the theoretical framework. So I decided that I'm not going to put it on chapter 2 as just one of the sections, but I'm going to dedicate a chapter and entitle it as organizational design in public institutions, then a theoretical perspective. Those are the first examples, and I want to pause here again so that I give an opportunity to you so that you can make comments. We are continuing with the use of the literature review, or how we use literature. The literature review is the literature review in a journal article is an abbreviated form of that found in a dissertation or master's thesis. And here you would remember, colleagues, that at the end of your studies, it is encouraged that you publish your work. Although you would have produced a dissertation or a mini thesis, you might want to publish, or you can be encouraged. And particularly, I know for the PhD, at the PhD level, it is a requirement for actually complying with the requirement for the qualification, that you must also make presentations in conferences, maybe one international conference or 2 local conferences, but also producing either 1 or 2 articles. So here, you're not going to publish a full literature review. You're not going to use the full literature review or the full literature sections of chapters. You would take just sections of them that are related to the paper that you're going to publish. And remember, your work, your findings and the outcomes of the research report would have several chapters, and chapters have got several sections. So you can choose to publish a section or a chapter. So a chapter is just but part. So it will take a section of the literature review that pertains to that chapter. So that is what you can publish. So this is the reason why here they're saying that in a journal article, your literature review is an abbreviation or abbreviated form of that found in a dissertation or a master's thesis. It typically is contained in a section called related literature. This is in an article, particularly if it is quantitative article, related literature, and follows the introduction to a study. So in other words, when you've got an introduction to the study, then the next thing is to deal with the literature review. And I want to say that you will note that when we deal with how we can publish and what is required of us, different publishing organizations or publishing organizations have got specific requirements. So they will tell you what they need, whether you start by introduction and your literature follows, or otherwise they will have provided guidelines to you on what you need, and they will indicate to you what you must comply with so that your article should be accepted under that public publishing body. This is the above pattern. I've already said that it is for quantitative research where related literature actually comes immediately after the introduction. But for qualitative research articles, which are referred as argumentative or narrative articles, the literature review may be found in separate sections, included in the introduction or threaded throughout the study. You must bear this in mind. I will revisit this. I've got specific discussions dedicated on this so that we can have a better insight on how this is done. But regardless of the form, another consideration is how the literature might be reviewed, depending on whether a quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods approach has been selected. In general, the literature review can take several forms, such as literature reviews that integrate that others have done and said. In other words, we're saying there's literature review that is done in order to integrate what others have done and have said. Another form is when the literature criticizes previous scholarly works. The other one is when the literature builds bridges between related topics. And the final one is where you identify the central issues in the field. I want to talk to form number C, which says build bridges between related topics. You will remember that we said that sometimes previous studies might have made the recommendation for future studies. So what you do in that case, they're saying, please go and study this side of a phenomenon that the previous study could not study, so that we can complete the dimensions of investigating this phenomenon. This is where I think there, when you do that, you are building bridges. Actually, you are making a link between your study, your proposed topic, and the previous topic, because the other one is based on the recommendations of the previous one. But with the exception of criticizing previous scholarly works, most dissertations and theses serve to integrate literature. In other words, form number 1, and then it organizes it into series of related topics. I don't know if it is number C, but it also allows us to summarize the literature by pointing out to the central issues. So we all have these 3, except the other one of criticizing in dissertations and thesis. And this is what is very important for people that are studying in order to obtain qualifications from a tertiary institution. Using literature consistent with the assumptions of learning from the participants. We're going to go through this very fast, because I've got other concepts which I think we must cover before we leave here. In qualitative research, inquirers use the literature in a manner consistent with the assumption of learning from the participant, not prescribing the questions that need to be answered from the researcher's standpoint. I want to make this comment that when you conduct qualitative studies, you are in the field and you want to gather perceptions of the respondents. There, you have open-ended questions from your interview guide. Sometimes when you ask one question to the respondent, they can answer so many questions that are still yet to be asked in your interview guide. And when they do that, you don't stop them. You allow them to lead the discussions. And what you do is to listen attentively to them, so that when they mention things and they don't finish it, they leave gaps. You probe and you make follow-up. You request them to clarify concepts or statements that they have said. When you do this, they are actually leading the discussions. You only initiate, then you allow them to lead. So when you do that, you will find that they give you a lot of information, some of it which is not even in your literature review. And here, what our statement is saying in here is that in qualitative research, we want to exhaust our literature review, but we will do some of it, and then leaving room that we would be advised where to continue with our literature review after having heard what the respondents are. This is an inductive approach, and I think I will make reference to it at a later stage. So here, that is where you learn from the participant what to study and what type of information should I look for from the literature, so that it either supports or it is against. That is how research is conducted. One of the chief reasons for conducting a qualitative study is that the study is exploratory. You see now, it is exploratory, so you explore, because people bring new things to you which you don't know. You're finding things, and they even assist you on what you should specifically look at. You might find that some of the aspects you have worded wrongly, or you have structured the design wrongly. Then they advise you through giving you information. And so you can continue to reposition yourself as the study continues. So they feedback, you see their findings, feedback into the design. Then it will assist you, go and explore that in the form of literature review. This usually means that not much has been written about the topic or the population being studied, and the researcher seeks to listen to participants and build an understanding based on what is said. You hear now, this is all what I was saying. You listen to them, you understand them, and then you build, then you use what they are saying as a pointer to what must assist you in doing literature review. However, the use of literature in qualitative research varies considerably. One way is that in theoretically oriented studies such as ethnographies or critical ethnographies, the literature on a cultural concept or a critical theory is introduced early in the report or proposal as an orienting framework. Now, this is opposed to what I just said earlier on in the previous slide. Because in the previous slide, you do very little about literature, but you listen to the people when they've spoken, then you go in and add more. Here, it is a deductive approach where you have got more literature at the beginning to position the studies before you go to the field. In grounded theory, for an example, case studies and phenomenological studies, literature is less often used to set the stage for the study. You see, you use a little bit of it, you use literature sparingly, knowing that you must first listen to the people. You must be advised in order to explore further. With an approach grounded in learning from participants and variation by type, there are several models for incorporating the literature review into qualitative study. And see the next session. There are 3 placement locations, and it can be used in any or all of these locations, as shown in table 1. We've got table 1 in the next slide. We won't go deep into it, but the researcher might include the literature from the introduction. So let's hear how this happens. In this placement, the literature provides the useful background for the problem or issue that has led to the need for the study, such as who has been writing about it, who has studied it, and who has indicated the importance of the study. All of these is what I think we might have touched earlier on. So wait a bit, I want to look at something here. Oh, okay. We are saying here, we're looking at how literature is used. Now here, we're looking at, we are hearing that literature can be, can assist in finding out who has been writing about it, who has been studying about it, that is the topic or phenomenon under focus, and who has indicated the importance of studying. This is when literature has been placed in the introduction. This framing of the problem is, of course, contingent on available studies, that it is based on available studies. If studies is not there, then you can also argue that little has been written about it. And then you can indicate what has been written, what has not been written. And in the next workshop, which is on Tuesday, I will show you a studies, particularly the role of vendor culture, where little was written. And I show you what I did in order to accomplish the section on literature review. And just bear this in mind to ask me what I've done. One can find illustrations of this model in many qualitative studies, employing different types of inquiry strategy. Now, this table is actually presenting to us the different usages of literature, placing it in the introduction, presenting it in separate sections, and presenting it at the end. All of it has got specific conditions, and I'm not going into that one. But let's go to the next slide. Now, and we look at the second form. You see that slide is what it contains what we're dealing with here now. Now, the second form here is to review the literature in a separate section, a model typically used in quantitative research, often found in journals with a quantitative orientation. And we've said this, that in quantitative oriented articles, we have got a literature at the beginning. From the introduction, then you've got related literature. Now, in theory-oriented qualitative studies such as ethnography, critical theory, or with a transformative aim, the inquirer might locate the theory discussion and literature in a separate section, typically towards the beginning of the write-up. I've done this. The Catchment Management Agency establishment project, research project, had the theory on it. That is where I said I had chapter 3 that had theory on it, and it was presented at the beginning of the project, which was on chapter 3. Then from chapter 2, it was literature review. Chapter 3 was literature review. So mainly, this is because I had a theory that I had to expand so that the theory could inform the studies. In other words, I was giving a effect to the theory. Now, the third form, that is where the researcher incorporates the related literature in the final section, where it is used to compare and contrast with the results to emerge from the study. This model is specific. The third one is where you can put literature in the final section, and here you contrast the results with the with literature. And this, I've got an example I'll be able to show you here. And this is mainly found in standard theory. Colleagues, what's funny? The study leader, I don't know how the study leader advised me. This project on the establishment of catchment management agencies includes 2 ways in which literature is used, because I have said it is the one that has got chapter 3 that was only dedicated on unpacking the theory. So that represents the use of literature at the beginning of the study. But at the same time, these studies did integrate literature at the end of the study. In other words, where we were contrasting the findings and literature. And this is what I'm going to demonstrate to you. 4 is where I was presenting results. It was in chapter 4. Chapter 4 has got some subsections. One of the subsection is 4.5, and 4.5 has got 4.5.1. And this is where I presented literature about the theory of organizational design. In other words, it mirrors the content and the principles of the theory of organizational designs that were discussed in chapter 3. But what we see is that apart from 4.5.1 mirroring our literature review in chapter 3, it is also related to 4.5.1. And I want to show you, it's also related to 4.5.1.1. And I'm going to show you it is the results. Here, these are the responses of participants. In other words, in the results section, in the findings, I had a section 4.5.1 that spoke about departmentalization, and it was mainly literature review only, no funding. But when I finished presenting the principle of departmentalization in the form of literature, then I received responses from the stakeholders, research participants, when I asked them. So 4.5.1.1, which you see in this slide, is the response that come from the research participants. Here, the strategy was to compare these responses with the literature review on departmentalization. And this is the reason why, let me show you how I've put the question so that we can see if the responses match or it fights the presented principles in terms of the literature. So this is what literature said, 4.5.1. Let me show you what I've asked people. The question is, are the functions allocated to the different organizational entities responsible for the management of water to the various water management areas correctly allocated? So, and I say, this question 6 answers to compare with the allocation of tasks in terms of the principles of departmentalization as presented from the literature section and as presented in this chapter in the form of literature, so that we can do a contrast between the findings and the literature itself. Let me stop here. I want to hear if you've got questions. I don't want to pass because I see that here there might be confusion. Let me stop. And if you are not confused, then I'll proceed. Anybody who wants to ask questions in terms of this, the presentation of the contrast between the findings and the literature review, which is done in chapter 4. The rest of these examples actually are following actually clarifying what a contrast is between literature and the findings. Then I finished. let me continue now with the use of literature now. I've moved from contrasting from the three ways in which it can be used. That's using it at the beginning, using it at the end, and no, the other one I just forgot what that is. The spreading it all over. But we'll recap when we finish it. But colleagues, quantitative research, on the other hand, we've just finished qualitative research. Quantitative research, on the other hand, includes a substantial amount of literature at the beginning of study to provide direction for the research question or hypothesis. This is mainly because quantitative researchers are positivists. They like rigid laws. They lean towards the natural laws, and they believe that information is there, is out there, and they don't want anything to pollute the findings. So they approach their studies and the collection of data deductively. They write things, they put principles up front. That is why most of them can use theory at the beginning, or they can put a hypothesis. And therefore, they want to give effect to the theory, or they want to test the hypothesis. So they put principles before. So their literature is at the beginning mainly. It is also used to introduce a problem or to describe in detail the existing literature in the section entitled Related Literature or Review of Literature or some other similar phrase we had when we spoke about the article in earlier slides. Also, the literature review can introduce a theory, an explanation of the expected relationships, describe the theory that will be used, and suggest why it is useful theory to examine. And colleagues, I've already said that I was surprised that in the establishment of catchment management agencies, the study was not quantitative, it was qualitative. But it had this theory explained up front in the first, in chapter 2. So that is a different approach. Maybe these approaches are not very rigid. They are flexible in nature because the studies was examined and it was completed successfully. At the end of the study, the researcher then revisits, that is in quantitative research, he revisits the literature and makes a comparison between the results with which existing findings in the literature. And this is what has happened. I just showed you that I contrasted the findings and the literature in the establishment of catchment management agencies in South Africa study. In this model, the quantitative researcher uses literature deductively. I've used that terminology to show you that they put things up front as opposed to inductively, where they depend on the findings, on the information that emerges from the informants. And this deductive approach is a framework for the research question or hypothesis. In a mixed methods, now this is the different research approach. We spoke about qualitative research approach. We spoke about quantitative research approach. Now the mixed methods uses the two. In this approach, the researcher uses either a qualitative or quantitative approach to the literature, and depending on the type of the strategy being used. Now, here the strategy, they refer to those designs that fall under mixed methods. There are different designs. There's an embedded design. There is sequential designs. Yeah, yes, I know those two approaches. Sequential is explanatory sequential and exploratory sequential. And the other one is embedded, meaning that you collect data at the same time. But explanatory design, you start by quantitative data and then followed by qualitative data. But in exploratory design, sequential design, you start by collecting qualitative data and you follow by collecting quantitative data. So the designs dictate whether the use of literature would relate to qualitative approach discussed earlier or related to quantitative approach discussed earlier. In a sequential approach, for an example, the literature is presented in each phase in a way consistent with the method being used. For an example, if the study begins with a quantitative phase, then the investigator is likely to include a substantial literature review that helps to establish a rationale for the research questions or hypothesis at the beginning. And this is a deductive approach, as we've said. But if the study begins with a qualitative phase, say for instance, in an exploratory sequential design, then the literature is substantially less, and the researcher may incorporate the literature more at the end. This is when they would have been they would have listened to the outcomes from the respondents. So the responses would point at areas where literature should focus, and this helps us to pick back and to go back, because we are in a reiterative process to ensure that there is alignment and we streamline all sections. So the findings and literature review must be the same. The findings must speak to the literature must speak to the findings. How nice an approach is this one? And this is an inductive approach, and which is what I appreciate more. If the research advances a convergent study, is in mixed methods, with an equal weight and emphasis on both qualitative and quantitative data, then the literature may take either qualitative or quantitative forms. The role of vendor culture, that study was an embedded one, because data was collected at the same time. I had a data collection instrument, my questionnaire. It had both closed-ended and open-ended questions. So I could collect quantitative data and qualitative data from the same instrument and speaking to the same respondent, and I could go and analyze the data at the same time. So I could then use my literature review in any way. The decision as to which form to use is based on the audience for the study and what they would be most receptive to, as well as to the students' graduate committee and their orientation. You see, who you are writing for, because you don't write for yourself, must dictate which strategy you need to use. So in other words, even the method and the approach. But what is more important is, what does the university say? What does UNISA say, or the College of Education, or College of Environment and Agriculture, or the College of Law, College of Science? What do they say? How do they guide? Huh? Then we take those into account when we put down our literature review. To recap, the literature is used in mixed methods project. Used in mixed methods project will depend on the strategy and the relative weight given to the qualitative or quantitative research in the study. In a qualitative study, now here are the suggestions now on how you need. It is a summary of everything that we discussed on how we need to use literature. Now we are given a synopsis of it as a reminder. In a qualitative study, use the literature sparingly in the beginning in order to convey any inductive design, unless the design type requires a substantial literature orientation at the outset. That is an advice. Advice number one. Number two, consider the most appropriate place for the literature in a qualitative study and base the decision on the audience for the project. You see, audience is very, very important. Keep in mind the options. Placing it at the beginning to frame the problem, placing it on separate sections, and using it at the end to compare and contrast with findings. These are the options that are available there, and you have to take decisions. As long as you can defend your decisions, these options are available for use. But in a quantitative study plan, use the literature to introduce the study, that we have been advised, because we use a deductive approach. To advance the theory, this is what I've done, and this is what we've had before in earlier slides. To describe literature, related literature in a separate section, is also one of the advices, and compare findings, which is what I've also done and I've presented successfully. Use the literature in a quantitative study deductively. You start with it so that it informs and you give effect. You see, if you want to prove a theory, then you put it up front, and its principles is what is going to inform data collection and data analysis as a basis for advancing research questions or hypotheses. You see, your questions are based on the principles or questions that give effect to the theory or that test the theory are based on the principles of theory. So the questions are there up front. and they guide you what you need to ask. Sorry, the principles are there, and they are the ones that you give effect to. And based on them, you generate research questions so that data that you collect is also relevant to the theory, and it can assist you in testing, confirming, or reversing the theory. However, in a mixed method study, use the literature in a way that is consistent with the measure type of the strategy, the qualitative or quantitative approach most prevalent in the design. We have said that, and is the latest slide that we looked at. But regardless of the type of the study, consider the type of literature review to conduct, such as an integrative. You see, these are strategically broad approaches in literature review. The one that integrates, the one that criticizes, and the one that build bridges amongst topics, or the identification of central issues. These are the 4 strategic approaches to doing literature review. We have had them when we started.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually doing research on machine learning, and my supervisor has indicated upfront that this is not a type of research that follows your social sciences and those type of research approaches. Now, I know that in the cases of those 2 fields of study, you would then either look at, like the doc is saying, quantitative, qualitative, or mixed approaches. But in my case, it's a very specific question that they are asking. And I've been looking at different approaches. What I'm finding is the sort of relevant approach would be what is called a meta-analysis method of study, of doing research. Research study. So now, is this the decision that I must take, that this is the approach that I would use in investigating the question, or addressing the question, or not? That's where my dilemma is. I'm not very sure as to what to do. However, I will engage with the supervisor, but it's somewhere down the line in about 3-4 months' time before I choose a study method. I'm not sure whether I'm clear, Doc, or not. Thank you.
Okay. Meta-analysis. Okay, you know what? Oh, I thought I don't understand meta-analysis, but I think it refers to you. It's a secondary study. No, I don't know how to call it. It's not as you are combining a number of studies. You are analyzing studies that have been conducted by other people. Is that correct, according to you?
Yes, that is absolutely correct.
Yes,
that is correct.
And this, what I've while you were talking, I opened the Google here. I'm disclosing. I don't want to rob you. when I opened, because I read about meta-analysis while I was reading a book by Sage, by Yves Cloud, somebody like that.
Yeah.
And they've got a section that deals with meta-analysis as part of the research approach, or what can be done. And it refers to me combining a number of outcomes from a number of studies, and then you analyze those. But my contribution is, I think they are correct in that this would need statistical analysis according to them. But what I want to do is that we must not, for now, I cannot conclude like that, because I did not read meta-analysis at depth. But here, Google is saying you need to use a statistical approach in analyzing, actually as an approach to actually doing this study. I'm not sure. I think you can go and study and I can go and do an investigation. If you remind me through an email, we can piggyback on it next week on Tuesday. Then I can again say something so that I say it in front of everybody for their benefit, and they will be benefiting from you. Can you and I remind each other to go and prepare for it so that next week on Tuesday we can present the findings? But my other question is to you. I'm not good at quantitative research, but I will look at the concepts and look at the approach. And that is, I think, what you are asking us to actually make insight on, isn't it?
Just a quick question, Doc.
Yes.
Stromane again. You were speaking about the two research methodologies, right? Methodology, right?
Yes.
Which is qualitative and quantitative. At
Yes.
which I'm not sure when we do our research, then we can use both, or which one do you recommend between the two?
The research question should advise you. It should point towards a specific approach, and you can use that one. But if you've got difficulties, I think the the supervisor and many more people like us, we can also come into the place to advise. But I want to say, you also have mixed methods that can mix the two. Then the choice is yours. But most importantly, what we are investigating, actually being informed by the research question, is what will advise us the type of the approach that we need to use, the designs, the methods, all of which is actually dependent on the question. But if you are going to collect qualitative data, it means you are already going to use qualitative approach. And if you're going to collect only quantitative, then only quantitative. But if you're going to mix, then mixed methods. But a decision on whether to collect qualitative, quantitative, or mixed data then is dependent on the research question again. In other words, on what you are investigating and how you want to achieve the research objectives. We are going to look at the steps in conducting a literature review. A literature review means locating and summarizing the studies about a topic. That is, studies that have been conducted by other people. And this is what gives us background. And it is what we said we need to use in all the sections of our research, because most of sections do have literature on it. And we can only write about them or do anything about them if we have read literature. So often these are such studies, but they may also include conceptual articles or opinion pieces that provide frameworks for thinking about topics. Research studies are those studies that have, are the articles. In articles, you would see that a person had a research question, then they went into the field to collect data, analyze it, interpret it, and present it. Yeah, so that is what we do when we write articles. When they say research studies, they're referring to that. But you also can have conceptual articles. A person can take books that have written about research processes or research methodology, and write about what is data analysis. Just reading the concept of data analysis and produce an article. So they're saying also that one is also important. But opinion pieces can provide frameworks for thinking about topics. There's no single way to conduct literature review, but many scholars proceed in systematic fashion to capture. In other words, we capture the information and then we evaluate it and summarize the literature. We will look at one recommended way, if I'm correct. Okay. Now, how do you begin with the literature review? What are the steps? You begin by identifying keywords, which is useful in locating materials in an academic library at a college or university. These keywords may emerge in identifying a topic or may result from preliminary readings. With these keywords in mind, use your home computer to begin searching the database for holdings, journals, or books, most major libraries have computerized databases, and it is suggested that you find initially on journals and books related to the topic. So you've got a lot. The University of South Africa is registered or has enrolled with a number of search engines. I don't know them, but you do have engines such as Google Scholar, Web Science, EBSCO, ProQuest, and JSTOR. A lot of them cover a broad range of disciplines, but other databases as Sociophile or PsychoInfo are based on particular disciplines. You see, you've got discipline-specific databases that are good for your disciplines, but you also have generic ones, the ones that are there above. So this is how you search. And I think what is presented in this slide is very, very simple, because every one of you does conduct literature search in the internet. And we're just saying it because it is one of the logics that they're advising us to follow. So know that what you're doing is important and it is actually scientific. But initially, try to locate about 50 reports of research in articles or books related to the research on your topic. Locate at least 50, but set a priority on the search for journal articles and books because they are easy to locate and obtain. Determine whether these articles and books exist in your academic library or whether you need to send for them by interlibrary loan or purchase them from the bookstore. These are common things and simple things, but please never undermine them because they're important for our progress. I was preparing for some of the workshops and I noted that when I was studying a book, they made reference to a specific book and I did not have access to some of the search engines. Then I spoke to someone who has got access to a site, a search engine, and when she could not get it, but she requested it from a specific library, and I got that one. After I finished, then we sent it back. So this is the reason why here they make reference to interloan process. But skim these initial groups of articles or chapters and collect those that are central to your topic. You see, even if you have got a lot of articles, not everything is relevant and not everything carries the same importance. The other ones are more related to your research topic. Others are there or they are so generic. So prioritize those that are more relevant to your research topic. Throughout this process, simply try to obtain a sense as to whether the article or chapter will make a useful contribution to your understanding of the literature. If not, throw it away. If yes, put it aside. Yeah, this is what I will use to a greater extent. As you identify useful literature, begin designing a literature map. This is what we will discuss later on in greater details. A map is a visual, a literature map is a visual picture of groupings of the literature on the topic that illustrates how your particular study will add to the existing literature and position your study within the larger body of the research. I will be able to show you those. Now, in this slide that you see here, I'm actually trying to give effect to what they're saying. But I also want to remind you that I made recommendations that literature is conducted from a global. Do you see up there? I said global nature conservation. This is what everybody in the world believes is nature conservation. So there are globally accepted approaches and concepts on nature conservation. But as we come to different continents, the Europeans in Europe do have their own way of understanding conservation because they are Europeans. The Americans, as a way, remember that Americans have got African Americans, and they've got people that come from Israel, the Jews. They've got a mixture of cultures there. So if you are studying a culture or an American culture, you might be studying a mixed of culture. But if you come to Africa, you have got an Afrocentric conservation approach. Then you've got a number of cultures in Africa, but the people in Africa mostly have been blacks, so their cultures are related. So you can see that the global context of your literature will differ from your continental concept of literature. But even within a continent, you have got different countries. In Africa, you have got Zimbabwe, you have got South Africa, you have got Botswana as examples. Those in one country, those in one continent would display different cultures. Because in Zimbabwe, although you have got Bavenda here, the greater part of the Bavenda are in South Africa now. So in Botswana, you don't have the Venda, a lot of the Venda speaking people. You can have 1 or 2 or 3 or 5. So the cultures are so different there. So it means from country to country, you've got different cultures. So the way in which you get literature on the role of their cultures will differ from country to country. But as you go locally here, in South Africa, you've got the Zulu speaking people, you've got the Tsonga speaking people, you've got the Pedi, you've got the Xhosa, you've got the Ndebele, you've got the English, you've got Afrikaans, you've got Tswana speaking, you've got a lot of people that are there. But you also have Venda speaking people. So if the study is about the Bavenda, so we believe that the Venda culture will be at play here than the Zulu culture. In my literature, I could have read something what is happening in KwaZulu-Natal in terms of the cultural relationship between the environment and the culture. Then I can just use it as a reference, but the depth of the Venda culture will only be found there. But look what I do. When you are doing literature, you would have literature that is broad about the Venda culture, but you have got literature that must speak about the biodiversity, the food resources, literature that talks about sacred shrines, sacred areas in Venda. You talk literature that talks about taboo in biodiversity, or taboo about plants, or taboo about animals only, taboo about water, or taboo about soil, and many more other things. So this is how literature is done. And this, what you see here, is a literature map. This does not have information. I will show you a better literature map that has got information. And it is about the role of Venda culture again that I've used. If I don't finish it today, I promise I'll start with it, or I'll make reference to it on Tuesday. Now, here is what happens now. If I can zoom into the specific subtopic or subject, okay, you can group your literature in terms of the subject. And here I've got an example here. In terms of the Venda culture, we have got what we refer to biodiversity, meaning all the living part of the environment. And other the living part of the environment, you've got only two. You either have animals or plants, because these are the only living aspects. Then I can zoom either under plants and talk about trees and shrubs and talk about grass. Otherwise, I can also zoom into animals. If I zoom into animals, there are reptiles, like your snakes, like your lizards. But animals can also be mammals. These are the animals that we eat. Sorry, larger animals like your elephants, your animals like your kudus, your zebras, all of them are there. Some eat animals. Then I can zoom under the mammals. There are animals like lions and cheetahs, they eat meat. But there are mammals like your kudus, your impalas, they eat grass. This is when I'm trying to classify my literature in terms of subject. This is an example, and you will be able to see it when you access the recording. So let this be an aid on how you can unpack and deal with your literature. Do you see that this is a very zoomed and a specialized type of a literature map? I will still go into details with you when I get an opportunity. But let's continue. As you put together the literature map, also begin to draft summaries of the most relevant articles. These summaries are combined into the final literature review that you write for a proposal or research study. Include precise references. Colleagues, if you don't mind, let me quickly rush and go to the literature map so that when we close today, we have finished the topics about literature map. If you want, I will come back to these steps. Let me go to the literature map for you so that we can finish this discussion once for all. We dust it. Here it is. This is the literature review that I conducted. In terms of the project The project is there. You can see at the bottom there. To be researched is the role of Venda culture in nature conservation. But a broader area in which this topic is located in the relationship between the Venda culture and the environment. And there we are saying, we postulate, if I was a quantitative researcher, I would put a hypothesis that there is a positive relationship between the Venda culture and the natural environment. And in my research, I was going to investigate and establish to confirm or to refute the hypothesis. But I just want to show you what literature I've used. And at the same time, I want to remind you that I said, I will show you the studies where you don't have enough literature and what you do, because you are required to conduct literature in any of the studies. And I will show you what I've done here. Now, this studies was about the environment and the culture of the Bavenda. Then when I started to consult literature colleagues, it was the time when I did not have a computer and I did not have access to internet. So I have never used electronic sources. No, for me was to walk into libraries. For me was to go into archives where documents are hidden in order to look for the documents, literature, the books that spoke about the culture and the environment, the plants and the Bavenda, the animals and the Bavenda, the soil in the Bavenda, the water in the Bavenda. What does the culture say? And look what I've found. I found a history book which was written by Davenport. This guy wrote about the Bavenda. But when he was writing about the Bavenda, then he made reference to water resources, that the Bavenda do protect water resources. Yes. But this guy did not only speak about the protection of the water resources, he also said that the Bavenda do protect the land. That is why there was land conservation. You see the block here, my map does have a block that has got land conservation and water conservation. And these were not the only natural resources or part of the environment which he made reference to. The guy, this Davenport, he is, if you follow my case and you see that line there, is connecting to this box that houses animals. So this guy spoke about animals there and land and water conservation. But I want to tell you that this guy was not writing about the Bavenda and the conservation of natural resources. He was talking about the history. Then he noted that historically in the past, the Bavenda had a good relationship, a positive one, with the natural environment, such as water, such as land, and the animals. I went on when I was in the library. I found a book on education. That book is by Matiba. And then when that guy was doing research, I think he was completing it for the University of the North, TEFLOP. Then he spoke about water resources as well. You find that, oh, he is like Davenport. Davenport wrote in 1981, then he wrote in 1985. They said more things that are related to water. He also wrote about things that are related to land. So it means Davenport and Matiba contributed to my literature review. And this is the reason why I've put them in here as part of the mind map. And if I go on and on, the historism, VDC, Undated also wrote something about the natural environment and the Bavenda. Botany, in botany, this is about plants only. And the guy wrote about the conservation of plant species and the usage. This was Mabogo Edward. And he used to be a lecturer at the University of Venda, and he later was employed under the Department of Economic Development under the division environment. And about the sacred shrines, Ben van der Waal was also the professor at the University of Venda, professor of zoology. He wrote about the conservation of plant species. He wrote about the land. He wrote about the water conservation. He also wrote about animals. Then he wrote about everything. But he, again, this very same van der Waal in 1984. Actually, he started in 1984 and then he came to 1997. But in 1984, he wrote only about the animals. Now, do you see what this mind map is? Then I distilled all the topics that were written about by all those authors into 4 boxes. These boxes that I was talking to you about constitute the biophysical part of the environment. Land and water are the physical. Animal and plants are the biodiversity. So all of them is what I intended to research, and this is the reason why you see here there are arrows that are coming from these 4 blocks that are going to the topic to be investigated, to be researched, the role of culture in nature conservation. Otherwise, if I didn't want to study all these 4 resources or component of the natural environment, I would only decide to study the 2, only the living environment, the biodiversity, the plant and the animals. We said these are the living ones. But if I don't want to study these 2, the living environment, I can also decide to study the non-living environment, which is the land and the water. So this is the end of my presentation on the literature map, and I want you to engage on it now. What is ethnobiology? Okay, this biology has to do with the cultural perspective of biology. That's why if you say ethnobotany, you're talking about botany from a cultural perspective, the cultural perspective of dealing with plants, studying plants. Very helpful map to assist in literature review. And hi Kononani, please kindly share your slides with us. They are very helpful. Yes, they will be found. You will find them when you access the recordings from the YouTube. Any other question or any other comment? I want to close. We are left with 5 minutes. The other aspects and part of the literature review, if you want, I can start with it and finish it next week before I go to the next topic. And they are interlinked, by the way, because that topic is also a continuation of literature review, but from a different perspective. It covers different topics than covered here, but they are all interlinked. When we do the conceptual framework, do we do it like literature review? Okay, let me answer that one. When you do a conceptual framework, the information about a conceptual framework is the same information as in the theoretical framework. In other words, you have got to do literature review for a conceptual framework. But the other thing that is important is that if you want to give effect to the conceptual framework, you actually, okay, the research process is actually a way of developing a framework. And I want to say that the final results, when you finalize your studies, it might be that your results contribute to the development of a new theory. So you would have to study and you would have to use the results to either confirm a conceptual framework or not. But literature must assist you in building one and in dealing with it initially in the way that you deal with the theoretical framework. How do we do in-text citation during literature review? Okay, this means that you are writing a story or you're writing some discussions. When you discuss, you can either, there are various ways of citing what I've done. Here you can say, Korombi conducted study about the role of culture in nature conservation. Then you put me in bracket 2001. You can also say, according to Korombi, the culture has got a positive contribution in the conservation of the natural environment. Or Korombi argues that the culture protects the environment through its ethics, such as the taboo, such as the science of omens, and such as the protection of edible plants or animals. You can do that one. But I want to say that different citation styles would advise you how you then acknowledge sources in texts. And here I'm not presenting a citation style, and I don't intend to present it because it's very monotonous to present it. But if you want to engage me and have a specialized discussion on citing in text or out of text, we can deal with it, and we will ask you to provide me with this citation style that you have adopted and the one that is recommended by the department. Then we can deal with it outside this platform. Thank you very much.